Well, Drew, we're trapped inside for the holidays. Maybe we should watch an action movie.
Ooh, like Die Hard?
No, we should probably do the sequel.
Oof, you mean A Good Day to Die Hard?
No, the good sequel.
Ooh, Die Hard with a Vengeance?
No, the one where John McClane's fighting on the wing of a plane.
Live Free or Die Hard?
No.
Okay.
All right, and we are here again and we are back again. As always, I'm Matt.
I'm Drew.
And this is the Back Again podcast. This is the only movie sequel review show where we take a sequel from the past and we find out if in fact it is worth going back ... again.
Nailed it.
And today we are doing the follow-up to the 1988 Die Hard, and we are doing Die Hard 2.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Die Hard 2 comes out in 1990. It's directed by Rennie Harlin. It has a budget of $62 million and a box office of $240.2 million.
It stars Bruce Willis, Bonnie Bedelia, William Atherton, Reginald VelJohnson, Franco Nero, William Sadler, John Amos, Dennis Franz,
And John Leguizamo, but only for 2 scenes.
Yeah, he doesn't even have like a speaking part,
They
right?
just show his face before he gets shot.
Nice.
But still, got a paycheck.
And he dies.
Die Hard 2 takes place a year after the events of the first Die Hard, where now Los Angeles detective John McClane is spending the holidays in Washington, D.C. with the in-laws. While waiting for Holly at the airport, John stumbles upon a group of mercenaries who successfully hijack the controls to an international airport. With the safety of Holly's arrival on the line, John must find a way to stop the bad guys, land the planes, and save Christmas. So I think the best way to explain how I feel about this movie is with 2 quotes from the movie itself, all right? There's a great quote, which is this one.
Now you're the wrong guy in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Story of my life.
And then there is a worse quote, which is this one.
Oh man, I can't fucking believe this. Another basement, another elevator. How could the same shit happen to the same guy twice?
And they
Right.
both kind of say the same thing.
They both kind of say the same thing, and you really only need one of those quotes in the movie, but they give you like every quote.
Yeah, it's
in
not
the
even those
movie.
2. They give us like, how many referential quotes to the first movie are there? Like not like moments, but just like direct quotes where they actually talk about the events of the past movie. There's at least 3 or 4.
Yeah, I think there's exactly 3 because there's those 2 that we just gave, and then there's also Holly at the end.
Why does this keep happening to us?
And it's like if I could pick which ones I want, I would take Story of My Life and Why Does This Keep Happening to Us? But that middle quote where he's down in the basement and he goes,
How could the same shit happen to the same guy twice?
it's like, geez, come on.
The movie constantly kind of bounces back and forth between those 2 quotes where it's, we like the self-referential,
Yeah.
and then we don't like the self-referential because it's too on the nose. Is there any like that much, because to be fair, there's not that much in general when it comes to sequels. Is there that much originality in this movie?
Well, we'll kind of get into it, but it's really just the same movie again. It's Die Hard again, but in an airport.
I know, and that's what most sequels are.
Yeah.
It's this movie, but this.
Yeah, even down to like the character traits and stuff. And I don't mind it that it's the same movie because there's still like good stuff in it. But there's
Die
just,
Hard was a movie that needed a sequel.
there's just a little bit extra. Like they didn't know when to stop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Which is funny because I feel like that's such a modern problem with movies, is like too much like fan service almost.
Yeah.
Or at least it's not even fan service, it's like self-reference.
Well, even with that line that how could the same thing happen to the same guy twice? Upon doing some research, there's actually different takes of this line. So when they did the trailer for this,
I would imagine there are different takes.
Yeah,
But like different takes that are like shown.
it's like a featurette of like making of Die Hard 2, and they show this clip.
How can the same thing happen to the same guy twice?
And it's a very different delivery, especially when you consider the take that they used in the movie, which is this.
How could the same shit happen to the same guy twice?
And it's like, who's editing this movie to where, I mean, out of those, I mean, I don't like the line in general, but out of those 2 delivery like ways of delivering the line. Like that one's way better because he's like in the moment. He's not like stopping and breaking the fourth wall like Deadpool.
Yeah.
And being like, wink.
Yeah.
Not this again.
Well, when does that moment take place in the movie? Is that right after the first fight?
It's after he meets like the hothead cop for the first time, whose brother is the guy that gives him the parking ticket in the opening scene. After that, he's like down in the basement. He's investigating some more because I don't know if he's found the maps yet from...
Oh, so it's a few minutes after the first fight. They had the first
Yeah.
fight, they had the release of tension, and now he's like back investigating after they told him to like fuck off.
Because he's in the basement, he's walking around, and he's just not talking to anybody. Like in the first Die Hard when he's talking
Nailed
to...
them both. That's what it makes me think of.
Like in the first Die Hard when he's talking to himself in like really kind of tight situations, like when he's in the air duct and stuff. Whereas in this, he's about to go into a tunnel. He's like I said, he might as well just like look to the camera and wink.
Well, the first one he's talking to himself because he's isolated the whole time.
No, yeah, for sure. In this one, he kind of chooses to be alone. He's
No,
not,
in this one he's always with people. He just goes off on alone. 'cause he's a
that's
loose
kind of
cannon.
what I meant.
Yeah.
When he goes off on his own journeys, he like chooses to be alone because the people aren't like helping him or
That's the thing. Is like you can't
whatever.
choose to be alone and then talk to yourself. It's
Yeah.
like you have to be forced to be alone, and then it makes sense that you're talking about yourself because you don't want talk to yourself because you don't want to be alone.
Yeah.
And the first one is just so much more justified. And this one, he's just talking to himself because the screenwriter
it's-
needed to
yeah,
like
it's-
draw connections to the first movie.
It's a sequel. And you know what I think it is too is because I've been watching some like behind the scenes footage on it and stuff. And you know, when they make that first Die Hard, you got to remember that Bruce Willis is coming off like a TV career. So he's not like a big action star yet. And a lot of people, you know, there were rumors like when they showed the trailer for the first Die Hard, people in the theater like laughed at the idea of Bruce Willis kind of being this person or whatever. But I think from the direction and from really the editing, they were able to really make this great movie. But with the second one, they already know the success of the first Die Hard. So when you watch this behind the scenes footage, the only difference is that, you know, because John McTiernan doesn't return because he's busy doing The Hunt for Red October, even though he wanted to return for it. But the difference is now Bruce Willis is sitting in the directing chair and Rennie Harlin's kind of over his shoulder and they're watching like, you know, dailies of Bruce getting shot at or like his face isn't on camera and he's like, maybe I could add like a funny line here, like, you know, like, oh, fucking Christmas again.
and this is where we get all the ADR.
Yeah, and I think that that BTS footage encapsulates like what this movie is, which is everyone knows what was successful about the first one, and they're kind of doubling down on it, but they're not being humble about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like they're committing to it, but they could just be a little bit more humble, and that's why instead of maybe like 2 quotes that reference the first movie, there's like 5.
Yeah.
You know?
So who was the director's name?
Rennie Harlin.
So what did he do before this? Was he just a puppet that Bruce could use, or was he like an actual action director?
Well, it actually makes sense why there are so many like one-liners or quotes because what Rennie Harlin does before this in 1988 is Nightmare on Elm Street 4.
Oh God.
I know, which is one of the not great ones. That's where it starts to get a little bit more comical and a little bit more cartoonish.
And they just let Robert Englund. Is it Robert Englund?
Yeah.
They just let him do all his one-liners.
yeah.
So
Oh,
that
yeah.
he's like, yeah, we just need you to come over on this movie now and just let Bruce do all his own one-liners.
Yeah, and like keep in mind, like, you know, even though we have problems with like the one-liners and the quotes, it's still like a well-directed movie. Like I think that the action is directed well to a certain extent, and you know, you kind of have to move the camera a lot when we're not spending so much time on like an isolated situation, which is robbers taking over a tower or a building. With this one, they're taking over an airport, but they're also doing more things. They have like, you know, they're trying to...
They've got a multi-part plan.
They got a multi-part plan, so it's like, all right, we got to just get through all these steps of the plan. So yeah, so I mean, it's directed well. I just think that the difference between like John McTiernan when he's doing the first Die Hard is he's probably being a little bit like, that's enough jokes.
Yeah. It's like we gotta get serious.
We gotta get serious. We gotta have serious moments about that. And they still try to do some of the serious moments in this one when, you know, the whole plane of the innocent people gets blown up and then, you know, John's crying in the snow and stuff like that. But
They really hit the extremes.
there are a lot of one-liners to the point where I think one of my favorite ones is when he is getting the reporter's helicopter for like the final battle to get on the plane. And the Samantha Coleman is the reporter's name. And she's like,
Jeez, you give me this story and I'll have your baby.
Not the kind of ride I'm looking for.
kind of coming up. So, you know, there's an ongoing theme with these sequels, which is doubling down, taking the characters we know and really leaning into those tropes that we recognize with them. You can see that in Die Hard 2. I wasn't upset with it. I think you see it the most on the plane with Holly and with that reporter Dick.
Well, what it really boils,
Right?
what it really boils down to for me is, like you said, it boils down to those quotes for you, right?
Yeah.
Which is like the references to the first movie.
Yeah.
What it boils down to for me is the setup on the plane. In the first one, the setup on the plane is the guy tells him to take his shoes off when he lands, feel the carpet beneath his feet, and then because of events outside of his control, he can't put his shoes back on, so he spends the entire first movie barefoot.
Yeah.
In this one, the setup is for a taser, which Holly uses to tase Dick at the end for a joke.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's essentially what it boils down to for me, is the first one was thought out, it had setup that paid off.
Yeah.
In this one, the setup is a joke. And it's like, that's good, but it's hollow to an extent.
They do the same thing with that reporter Dick, because it's like...
They just double down on his character.
Yeah. His whole thing in the first one was kind of ruining the secrets that were inside the tower, which is, you know, Holly's married to John McClane.
Yeah.
This one, it's like we just need him to cause ruckus again or to spoil something. So he just he does the report from the plane, then everyone in the airport's freaking out, and then, yeah, like you said, Holly tases him. So if I had to like remove one part of the movie, I'd probably take out that part because it's really not necessary.
That part doesn't do anything. It's really just we're gonna copy it's not even the B plot, it's like the C plot.
Yeah.
We're gonna copy the C plot from the first one and just, you know, put it in and hope no one notices.
I actually like how much Holly is in the movie in this sequel.
I know, but she's not doing anything new. She's just
not
doing what
anything
she did in the
new.
first one.
But I like the fact, at least with the second one, because as they continue the Die Hard franchise, he's going to always have family problems. Like, not, well, spoilers, but in the third one, him and Holly are divorced, right? And it's like, in the first one, they're trying to get back together. So there's that kind of struggle with it. In the second one, it's more like, no, they love each other. There's just this incident that's stopping them from kind of spending Christmas together. I think more movies rely heavily on like there's a problem within the relationship. So I like the fact that he's like, he loves her, and that, you know, there's no really like personal internal conflict. It's really all external. It's really just the bad guys.
You can have internal conflict as long as you keep it simple if it's an action movie.
Yeah.
Which I think the first one did really well, where there is internal conflict, but it takes a backseat to the action.
Yeah.
This one, there is no internal conflict, which I think makes it kind of shallow.
Yeah.
But
Well, you brought up a really good point with that callback of the shoes on the plane. There's actually only one callback in this movie that I think is clever, and it's when Samantha Coleman, once again, is trying to like interview the Colonel. And she goes, do you have like a quote that you can give me? He's like, yeah, 2 words, fuck and you.
Yeah.
Right? And then later, when she's in the elevator with John McClane, she goes, how about a quote? And he goes, I got one for you, fuck and off. And she goes, oh, well, you know, you'll get along with the Colonel. And then that's when he goes, oh, the Colonel. Right? So he knows the Colonel's in the airport, and then all this shit kind of starts going down. And then when she brings it up later, that's where he starts connecting the dots. So in a movie where there's not a lot of clever callbacks as much as the first one, that was the only one where I was like, oh, okay. At least now John has like an actual, as far as how he's getting the information.
that was all right. It sounded more like they just needed to like get the information to him so that he could continue the plot.
Oh yeah,
but
absolutely.
Whatever.
So speaking of the Colonel, and now we can kind of go back to talking about the Colonel. He's our villain, right? He's Death from Bill and Ted, and you know, when we meet him, he's doing like yoga, karate, and he's naked in his hotel. And you know, it's like, what do you think of this villain? You know, he's no Hans Gruber, obviously, but
He's not that good.
well, what I think what they did instead was, instead of making an interesting villain, they made an interesting attack, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they replaced with, because the whole thing in the first Die Hard is that you expect them to be these like terrorists. It's like, you guys are just bank robbers, or you guys are just like robbers or thieves or something like that. But then with this one, it's like, all right, well, we don't have an interesting villain, so let's like make him naked in the first opening shot, and then let's just have him like take over every plane and then like crash a plane into the ground and kind of stuff like that. So they raised the stakes with the threat.
They raise the stakes in the action, but not in like who he is.
He's
or what
not
he
exactly
stands for.
threatening,
Yeah.
right?
Because that's the thing is like with money, you have clear motivation, and then with the bonds or the stocks or whatever that they were trying to steal in the first one, you have like a clever twist. So it's like, okay, they're driven and they're smart. In this one, he's trying to free I don't remember what the South.
He's a cocaine.
It was some South American country.
Yeah, but he's like a cocaine dealer, because Samantha Coleman's like the war on cocaine or the battle for cocaine.
Well, he's like a South American despot that was like a big proponent of like, he's like pro drugs because it makes me money, And then he got deposed, and then he's getting flown to American prison.
Kind of like Con Air.
Okay, kind
He's
of like
getting
Con Air.
flown to his prison.
Exactly. And then they try to get him out when they land or when they touch down on American soil.
Yeah.
And I don't really know what the Colonel's motivation to do that is.
I guess just, I mean...
Is it money?
I think it's just loyalty and rank, right? Like
Loyalty
he's just,
to who?
To him, to the drug
He's a
guy.
South American despot. How would he know him?
They never go into like, why is this relationship a relationship?
Yeah.
Right? But it's just kind of like, these are just kind of rogue ex-military guys that are probably, like you said, just doing it for money or just doing it for, whatever reasons.
Who's the guy in charge of the military unit that goes there, the army unit?
Oh, you're talking about the guy who is from Coming to America.
Yeah.
Who ends up being like another bad guy. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
I feel like they know each other through him because I
Yeah.
feel like the military guy who's not the colonel. Well, they knew each other through the military. The colonel and I don't know what we call this guy, like the fucking corporal or something. I don't know.
We'll call him Switcheroo because
Yes.
he's the guy that does the old switcheroo.
Yeah, he
in
does.
The third
He betrays him. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the colonel and Switcheroo.
Yeah.
They I feel like Switcheroo knows the despot better than the colonel does.
Okay.
And the colonel is just the guy with the idea.
Okay.
But that's just like the feeling I got. I don't know.
I don't know. I would like to see maybe like a spin-off prequel of like where they were before the events of Die Hard 2, where they were like, you cut to like their mansion and they're counting dollars and doing cocaine and then...
Well, that's what you could do back then is you could just use buzzwords like drug war and like everyone knows what it is because it's part of the zeitgeist. And now we're like drug war and we're like, what's that? It's like, was that when they used to like, arrest people for marijuana?
Well, it just doesn't feel like the bad guys fit together. So like even with Hans and his guys in the first one, they all have a German accent.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And that's very like...
Well, yeah, they're all European.
Yeah, they're all European.
Yeah.
So it's like,
In this one, the whole point is that ex-American military is helping this South African dictator out of prison, but he's got his own people with him, but all of his own people want him dead because he's a despot, and it's like, it's hard to figure, if you're not John McClane or a cop, it's hard to figure out where you factor into the plot, honestly.
Sure. Yeah. And there was one part of their plan that was kind of not thought out because they had this whole thing thought out where they're going to hijack the airport, but when you cut to the drug lord who's on the plane, there's one guard guarding him in the back. He asked for him to light his cigar, and then when you cut back to him, he's like choking the guard.
Yeah.
But then he still had to take over the plane.
We saw that.
I know, but like that was part of the plan. So the plan
yeah.
was very reliant on the main guy that they're rescuing breaking himself out.
That's right, because the dictator was on a plane with 3 guys who wanted him. He was there with no allies.
It wasn't even guys. It was one guard, and then it was two pilots. Yeah.
But that's the thing is all 3 of those people were like, none of them were in men. None of them were his men. So he had to, this dictator hypothetically would have had to overpower these 3 people.
Yeah, this like 56-year-old man.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how he got that guard like in that position to kind of like choke him.
He got him close.
Whatever.
Yeah.
But so for the most part, I think it would always be unfair to try to compare Hans Gruber to anybody because what's different about this sequel than other sequels that we've done is Die Hard is like a really classic film.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm trying to think of what other movies we do on this action sequel list that's going to be like not just a good action movie, but like
a staple.
Like a staple kind of film. And I don't know if we really have one because
we might not have one.
All the other films are like really good films and they contribute stuff like to like the history of film. But Die Hard is like a universal like everybody's seen Die Hard.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep that in mind, like when we're comparing and contrasting.
Well, Die Hard's one of the few action movies where it's like if you haven't seen it, you should.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Because there's so
it gets you like into action movies.
Exactly.
I think, if you like that,
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Side characters.
Well, another side character that they bring back from the first one is
Reginald Vell Johnson. He's in for one scene though.
I know, but they literally
just call him Family Matters.
They cut to Family Matters.
Yeah.
And what really annoyed me about that scene, and we were talking about during the movie, is that they cut to
It was an ad for faxing.
But they cut to Family Matters, and he's eating a Twinkie.
Yeah.
And he's like shoving a Twinkie in his mouth. But the whole thing about the first Die Hard when he's picking up the Twinkies and then the clerk looks at him funny, he goes, "Hey man, give me a break, my wife is pregnant." And you were like, well, maybe he was lying in the first one and actually he's just a fat ass.
Yeah. We never see his pregnant wife, right?
I know, but I like it being true because it's like putting a cliche cop trope at the beginning of like meeting that character.
And then you switch it.
And then you switch it. Whereas in then the second one, it's almost like the director.
We got the fat cop eating Twinkies. And it's like, of course we do.
It's like he didn't even see the first Die Hard where Family Matters brought up on set. He's like, you know that my character doesn't like
eat Twinkies. It's for his wife.
It's for his wife. He's like, no. He was like eating a Twinkie.
You eat Twinkies.
Yeah.
Yeah, take that Twinkie out of your mouth and grab a pencil, will you?
And then just to go back to those other side characters, Argyle and Marvin, I prefer Argyle because he's definitely like not aware of what's going on, and there's some good scenes where you cut to him like dancing in the car or dancing in the limo while like, you know, they're getting shot up in the building. Whereas in Marvin, he's just like there for the plot.
Yeah.
He's really like whatever John McClane needs.
Argyle's got more of a voice, and he's got more of his own like contained arc.
Yeah.
Where doesn't he like stop some of the terrorists from escaping at the end of the first one?
Yeah, he ends up like crashing the limo into some of the robbers or whatever, and he like punches them in the face in the car.
He's like he can do things on his own.
Yeah, whereas Marvin finds like a dead body, and then he takes the jacket, and then he's able to. He's like our MacGuffin guy. He's always got like the thing that John McClane needs to go to.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like Argyle's there almost like separate of the plot, just as like a B plot or like a C plot, whereas Marvin is like the main instigator of the main plot. Which sucks because it just gives him a bunch of exposition to say and a bunch of like boring stuff to do.
Well, Argyle is he's like the audience. He's like, he keeps the film grounded because we're always cutting back to like his reality. Whereas in Marvin's always like, what do you need now? And to the point where he literally picks them up in like the golf cart at the end of it and drives them away. But I don't know. I feel like we talked a lot about this movie. I mean, obviously there's some good stuff in it. There's some stuff that they kind of went over the top with, but I think we can get into the ranking of it if you want to.
Sure.
That was really, the challenge for us was to see whether or not we could match or top what we did in this huge action film called, Die Hard. And I think we've surpassed that.
So as always on this show, we ask 3 questions that lead to a final vote of is it worth going back again? And the first question is, does it work as a sequel? And you can kind of start off if you want to.
It doesn't fail as a sequel, so I think I have to give this a check. I don't know. The one-liners are bad for the most part. There are some good ones, but for the most part, they're bad. The side characters are bad, but I don't know. You watch Die Hard for like McClane.
Yeah.
And I feel like he was okay in this. He's not the John McClane from the first one, and I kind of wanted to see a little bit more of that, but this is definitely still in the wheelhouse. I feel like the screenwriter had enough of McClane's voice in this to keep it consistent and to keep his character specifically good.
Yeah.
The side characters are lackluster, the villain is lackluster, but McClane and the action, I think, are still pretty where they need to be. I feel bad about giving it a check, if I'm being completely honest. But I do think it checks the boxes, where it's like, I watch it and objectively I know it's a good sequel, but I don't want to watch this every Christmas like I watched the first one.
Yeah.
So there's just something lacking. And I think we've done a decent job talking about what specifically is lacking, so I'm not going to repeat it, but there's just, it's not all there.
I think you feel bad about giving a check, which is the same reason. I'm going to give it a check as well. But I feel like we feel bad giving it a check because it's so obvious that this is just the first movie done again, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, as far as side characters go and as far as what is the situation. The reason why that isn't a detriment to the movie is because I think of the bigger world. So like with a lot of these sequels, what we want is kind of a continuation of these characters and stuff, but we want kind of a bigger world. And really, when they start doing that airplane stuff, like, I don't care about the villains, but as far as what they're doing, I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, you could tell the screenwriter was like, we need higher stakes. And they didn't do that by amplifying the villain. They did that by amplifying the location and the play out of events that lead to, I would say, your second act.
So let's say this. Let's say it works as a sequel because it doesn't ruin the first movie.
That's
right?
a very kind of pessimistic way of going about it, but yeah.
Because a lot of these, like you look at Too Fast, Too Furious.
This is the most passable, successful sequel I think that we'll do on this list.
Yeah, like I mean, if you look at like Lethal Weapon 2, that works as a sequel because it continues the characters.
But that's the thing.
It continues the arcs. You look at Too Fast, Too Furious, it doesn't continue the story. With this one, they give you another entertaining story. They continue John McClane a little bit. All the other side characters are kind of brought down. So it works as a sequel, but maybe barely. All right, so that sounds like it's going to be 2 checks for that one. So let's move on to the second question, which is going to be, is it enjoyable / entertaining? And you can start off this one again if you want.
Oh boy. I'm gonna say yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's again just barely. I wish we had a better way of doing this that wasn't like a yes or a no. But if we're going to just go based off of was it more enjoyable than not enjoyable, I'm gonna say just barely though. And it's mostly because of Bruce Willis.
Yeah, well, it's mostly because of what you expect.
Bruce Willis and the stakes.
Yeah, what you expect from Die Hard.
Yeah.
Right? So
Which is Bruce Willis and the stakes.
I also think it's enjoyable / entertaining. I think that there were more opportunities for it to be boring in this movie. Like there could have been more scenes where it kind of drags on a little bit and stuff like that.
When things aren't streamlined, you have that risk.
Yeah, and it's always the scenes where we have to like kind of talk about what we're going to do next. Like I think a little bit about where they're going to go to try, where the bad actor and Bruce Willis are going to go try to initiate that second antenna, right? And it turns into like, you know, a big shootout.
It's a setup, yeah.
It's a setup. It's on purpose. Like the bad guys expect him to go there because they're going to kind of shoot it out. And then there's like, you know, the conveyor belt scene and stuff. So there are like filler scenes that
get squished.
Yeah.
But not really.
So there are like filler scenes that in a generic action movie probably would stick out more, but because this is Die Hard, you're like, you think it's more intricate, right? You think it's like, you know, oh, well, yeah, well, naturally.
You have the first movie to go based off of.
Yeah, you naturally expect these kind of big kind of set pieces to play out or whatever. Well, the difference is like the villain. Right, because even when you're not with Bruce Willis, you are entertained by Alan Rickman in the first one, and also that reveal that they're just robbers.
And the dynamic between Alan Rickman and Holly,
Absolutely,
because he's got a secret to keep and he's looking for the answer.
And then there's like the cheesy like other coworker that's trying to like do business with Alan Rickman and stuff. So there's
even the flawed characters were more engaging.
Yeah, what makes that first one entertaining outside of the action and the stakes are those slow scenes where people are talking and it's a little bit more emotional, like when Bruce Willis is in the bathroom wrapping his bloody feet. So there were never any scenes like that in the sequel. It's very fast-paced. And even when we have moments where we're kind of talking about stuff, it's really about, well, what do we do next? What's the next kind of plan? Like I think of a lot of scenes with Marvin, and I think a lot of scenes with bad actor who's trying to fit. If we channel the radios, we can talk to the pilots, and then they'll never know what's happened. So,
Damn. The outer marker. It's a beacon, right? A radio beacon that sends out this beep, beep, beep so they know they're over it, right?
So?
He's like the human screenwriter who's just like, how are we going to get out of this one? Well, let me think as a screenwriter.
Yeah. It's like he was feeding him those lines on the
exactly.
day. Like the writer himself was like,
here's what you got to do next.
Here's what we got to do. Here's what we got to do next. So I think that's going to be another 2 checks again for his enjoyable / entertaining. So the last question is going to be, does it need to exist? And I will start this one off and I will say no.
I'm just going to jump right in and say no too.
It does not need to exist. And I don't have a problem with it existing. It's obvious why it exists. But this is one of the
franchise money.
Yeah. But this is one of the more rare movies where the original is such a staple and it's also such a classic film.
If the first were lesser, then yes, maybe. But the thing is, the first one's so good and the sequel's so meh.
I just don't know if you could ever make a sequel to a movie like Die Hard and live up to Die Hard.
That's how I felt about The Raid.
That's fair.
So I feel the same about both movies.
But I also don't want to hold that against the sequel at the same time, because there are really good standalone movies that have a sequel that are still good sequels, and that are also still good standalone movies on their own, right?
Sure.
So I don't want to make it tied to that, but yeah, it doesn't need to exist. Like you only need that first Die Hard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I like all the Die Hard sequels except for the last one, which is garbage. It doesn't need to exist. I think it works as a sequel for what they did. I think it's enjoyable / entertaining to a certain extent. But yeah, this doesn't need to exist. So if you're doing that math at home, that's going to be 4 checks and 2 X's. So it's going to get 1 giant check for worth going back again. And yeah, so that's it's going to get the check and it's worth watching and stuff. But if you have Die Hard, just watch Die Hard instead.
Sure, yeah.
Because, it's Christmas, and that's...
Die Hard is probably one of the few movies, I don't want to jinx it, but I could rewatch that every year until the day I died.
Oh, I could do Elf and Die Hard back to back.
I can't do Elf anymore. I'm done with Elf. But Die Hard and Gremlins.
Was what you expected?
No.
is just the beginning.
On July 4th, Die Harder.
Well, Drew, that was a really good episode again of Back Again. Which sequel should we do next week?
Well, actually, I know about this really cool reboot called The Witches, which is a reboot for a Roald Dahl book from way back in the 80s. And what's going on right now?
Oh, that's our Back Again producer. I think he's shutting it down right now.
Oh, yeah. How do we know when we're done?
I mean, I don't really know. I guess he just kind of decides when we're done. I don't really know what's going to happen, but...
Okay, we're done, guys.
I'm back again.